Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Like, can you explain how f is z equal to mod z has all pointer singularities?
Because this is uh, fz equal to mod z is not holomorphic at any point. Just use Cauchy-Riemann equations, for example, and check that this is not holomorphic at any point. Therefore, every point is a singularity, so no singularity is isolated.
Sir, how exactly to visualize f of z equal to mod z?
That is okay, no? That's just the distance from the origin. Take any point, send it to the distance from the origin. I mean, that is the function visual, yeah. To prove that it is not holomorphic requires, of course, some, you have to get pen to paper and check. Yeah, so maybe there's one more example, I suppose. So I have not included it. So for example, check. So if you want one more example, check that. Check that. So maybe I'll include this in the slides when I send it again. Check that 1 upon sine 1 by z. 0 is not an isolated singularity. Take 1 upon sine of 1 by z. Then you can check that 0 is a non-isolated singularity. Maybe I'll include this in the tutorial. Yeah, you can actually find the sequence of points converging to 0 on which this is not holomorphic. So 0 is not isolated. Yeah, I'm taking 1 upon sine 1 by z. Yeah. Yeah, any doubts? Yeah, so think about it. I'll go ahead. I think this is quite a simple definition.
So for a given function, arbitrary function,
yeah,
how do we check whether it is not an isolated singularity? Because we'll have to check for infinitely many points, right? Like proof for infinitely many points that it is not.
Yeah, but sometimes. Yeah, but sometimes just you will be able to get an expression for all the singularities in one shot. For example, if you for example, let's just take the example that I just just take the example on the slide. Take fz equal to mod z. You can easily see, right? It's not isolated because at all points it has singularities. Or if you look at the other example which I just mentioned, 1 upon sine of 1 by z, you can easily get an expression for all the values of z for which this function is not holomorphic. This function blows up. So in one shot you get all the singularities. You don't necessarily have to do separate analysis for each.
Singularity means it is sufficient to check where the function blows up, where the denominator goes to.
Okay, no. See, I'm saying there are. See, look at the first line. The set of points in omega where f is not defined or not holomorphic are called the singularities. The two possibilities. Either it's not defined at that point. The function always has a domain of definition, right? After all, the function may be defined on some open set omega. I may remove 500 points from omega, and at those points again I have singularities because I have not defined the function at those points. I have only defined it outside for those 500 points from outside omega minus those 500 points. So it's either that the function is not defined at the point, or if it is defined, it's not holomorphic. One of the two possibilities. So it may not necessarily blow up. We will see examples. All this is going to come up in the upcoming slides. It may not necessarily blow up. For example, in calculus, you know, right? When a function does not, suppose limit of fx as x tends to a does not exist. It doesn't necessarily mean that fx blows up as x tends to a. It can also oscillate infinitely. For example, limit of sine of 1 by x does not have limit as x tends to 0. It doesn't blow up as x tends to 0. So removable and non-removable singularities. So sometimes singularities are innocuous and you can just remove it by suitably defining the function at that point. Other cases, you just have to live with them. So removable and non-removable. If an isolated singularity can be removed by defining the function by assigning a certain value at that point, we say that the singularity is removable. If not, we say it is non-removable. For instance, the function fz equal to sin z by z is a removable singularity. By redefining the function to be fz equal to sin z by z for z not equal to 0 and 1 for z equal to 0, you get a function which is holomorphic even at 0. Yeah, I suppose people can now prove that sin z by z is holomorphic at 0. More generally, so a generalization of this example, more generally, take any holomorphic function f on omega, and for some point z0 in omega, define gz to be f of z0. Sorry, I'm sorry, that's a bit of a typo there. Sorry. I meant define gz to be fz minus fz0 upon z minus z0. Not what has come. There's a bit of a typo here. I want to define gz to be fz minus fz0 upon z minus z0. Then gz has a removable singularity at z0, which is removed by defining the value at z0 to be f prime z0. So it's related to the earlier example sin z by z. Yeah, since this limit exists, limit fz minus fz0 upon z minus z0, as z tends to z0, the limit exists. So by redefining the value at z0 to be equal to f prime z0, we have gotten rid of the singularity at z0. The function 1 by z on C star has a non-removable singularity at 0. So this, no matter what value you assign at z equal to 0, you cannot remove the singularity. Yeah, let me just repeat. There's a little typo. Gz is defined to be fz minus fz0 upon z minus z0. I'll make the correction and send it.
Sir,
Any doubts?
Sir, how would we do this? Is there an example for removable singularity when it's a non-isolated singularity?
No. My definition. I only make this definition for isolated singularities. So removable singularities are defined for if it's a non-isolated singularity, you just keep it as it is. We are only analyzing isolated singularities. So this whole first of all, the singularity has to be isolated, and then this condition has to hold.
Okay, but like, is there any kind of function which has a non-isolated singularity, but like there is some kind of method for like sort of defining some extension of the function over there, and then it turns out to be holomorphic?
Well, you can do one silly thing, right? After all, suppose you have a holomorphic function on an open set omega. Choose a sequence of points zn which converge to a point z0, and remove this set zn and z0. Remove that. Then you can then the z0 is a non-isolated singularity, but you can actually define the values at that point, because to begin with it was defined at that point. So you can always do something silly like that and get an example. But this example is really for isolated singularities. You understand my example, right?
Yeah,
Just
I understand that.
choose a sequence Zn converging to Z0, remove it from the open set omega. And that is one thing you can do, but you can also you probably with more work you will be able to, using examples like sin z by z, you'll be probably able to construct more interesting examples as well, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Talk about holomorphy. We need the function to be defined on a neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
So if it is not isolated, then it won't make sense to talk about holomorphy.
No,
right?
but his question is you could just define it in some way and make it holomorphic.
No, but to talk about holomorphy, we need it to be defined on a neighborhood, right?
Yeah, but suppose it is not defined, then you can define it in. There may be a sequence of points converging to a given point at which it is not defined. But suppose you can define it, you can assign some values there and make it holomorphic. Then what? That is the question.
Sir, a sequence will have only countable many points, right?
No, define the values at all the points at which it is not defined, let's say in a neighborhood. And suppose you can make it holomorphic, suppose.
Sir, if it is non-isolated, then it is not defined in any point of the neighborhood, right?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying it is not defined at some point in every neighborhood. Not defined at some point in every neighborhood is not the same as not defined at any point in any neighborhood. No, every neighborhood. No.
Okay, sir. Got it. Sir, and if we say, like, if we somehow find out that a function has finitely many singularities, then can we assert that they all must be isolated?
Yeah, of course. Finite means it's isolated, because you can always choose a neighborhood which doesn't contain any other point.
Sir, yes.
Yeah. Finite is always isolated. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully this clarifies various points. So note that if an isolated singularity at Z0 is removable, then limit of fz as z tends to z0 exists. Obviously, because and it will equal the value of the function at that point. In fact, you have removed the singularity by defining the value at some point and made it holomorphic. So of course, limit of fz as z tends to z0 will exist. But what is interesting is that the converse is also true, and that is the Riemann's removable singularity theorem. So let me come to Riemann's removable singularity theorem. So theorem z0 is removable if and only if limit of fz as z tends to z0 exists. So I have once again remarked that clearly removable singularity implies this limit exists. Okay, is the statement of the theorem clear? If the limit exists, then you can assign the value at z0 and make it holomorphic.
Just the existence of the limit is enough.
Yeah, the proof is not difficult. We will see the proof soon. For the converse, suppose the limit exists. Then limit of z minus z0 times fz as z tends to z0 will be equal to 0, right? Product of the two limits, z minus z0 tends to 0, limit of z tends to z0 exists, so product will go to 0. Then define gz equal to z minus z0 square times fz if z is not equal to z0 and 0 if z is equal to z0. So if f is analytic in a punctured neighborhood of z0, then clearly g is analytic throughout that neighborhood. So it's z0 is an isolated singularity, and so therefore f is analytic in a punctured neighborhood of z0. Then I claim that we know that we don't know for the moment, we don't know whether f can be extended to a holomorphic function at z0, but we know that it's analytic in a punctured neighborhood of z0. Then I claim that g is analytic throughout that neighborhood, including z0, right? Because g is z minus z0 square times fz. So outside z0 anyway it will be holomorphic. You want to check that it's holomorphic at 0. So just compute the limit of gz minus gz0 upon z minus z0. What will you get? You'll get limit of z minus z0 times fz as z tends to 0. But this is equal to 0. So just by applying, just from first principles, applying the limit, you see that g is holomorphic at z0. That holomorphic same as analytic. So it's analytic throughout that neighborhood. So let's write gz as c0 plus c1 times z minus z0 plus c2 times z minus z0 square and so on. Now g of 0 is equal to 0. So this constant c0 equal to g of z0 is equal to 0. But c1, which is equal to g prime at z0, is also 0. Because how do you compute the derivative from first principles? You get z minus z0 times fz limit as z tends to z0, which is 0 from the third line. So the c1 is just the derivative at z0. So that is also 0. Thus gz is really starts with the third term, c2 times z minus z0 square plus c3 times z minus z0 cube and so on. So now if we define f of z0 equal to c2. So now how would I try to define f of z? F of z should be like gz upon z minus z0 square, right? So f of z0 I will simply define as c2. Then f is holomorphic throughout z0. That is z0 is a removable singularity. And f will now become a power series c2 plus c3 times z minus z0 plus c4 times z minus z0 square and so on. So just now that you have a power series expansion for gz, simply divide by z minus z0 square, and that will you get c2 plus higher order terms, and define the value at z0 to be equal to c2. That defines a holomorphic function at z0. Is this clear? Just go through it. Spend a minute and go through it. Yeah, is it clear?
Sir, how did we conclude that G is analytic?
Well, first of all, outside Z0 there is no problem, right? You agree? G is just a product of two holomorphic functions, so it's analytic. At 0 it is analytic because you compute the limit, compute the derivative at 0 and check that it is holomorphic even at 0.
Okay, got it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So this is the in some sense the proof is easy. What is interesting is the theorem. I mean, once the theorem is stated this way, it's not difficult to prove it. But anyway, please go through the thing slowly. The proof is very simple actually. So let me not wait any longer. You can easily understand the proof. So this is Riemann's theorem, very easy to prove. So now let's look at poles. So so intuitively a pole is a point at which the function blows up from all directions. So once again, an isolated singularity z0 is said to be a pole if limit fz as z tends to z0 is infinity. That means the function takes values outside any bounded set in any small punctured neighborhood of z0. So choose take any punctured neighborhood of z0, the function is unbounded in that neighborhood. If this happens, we say that the function has a pole at z0. So once again, as before, first of all, it has to be an isolated singularity, and this condition should hold. Limit fz as z tends to z0 is infinite. Okay. So next thing, yeah, definition is clear, I hope.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I didn't understand. Sir, actually, we are saying that for a point to be a pole, it has to blow up, its value has to blow up from all directions, right?
Yeah.
But in the bracket, what is written that it takes values outside any bounded set in any small punctured neighborhood of z0.
Yeah.
So the punctured neighborhood of z0, it may happen that the function is taking values from only one direction, like blowing up only from one direction, right?
Yeah, but yeah, it may.
So in that case, f will not be a pole. Like the point will not be a pole.
No. See the statement again. The function takes values outside any bounded set in any small punctured neighborhood of z0. So if I choose any punctured neighborhood of z0, however small, the values that the function takes is outside any bounded set. So if I approach along z0 in one direction, it will tend to infinity in some direction, right? But if it tends to infinity in some direction, that means it has gone outside any bounded set.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
No, but I'm saying that it might happen that in that small punctured neighborhood, the values which are coming from outside the bounded set are coming from one particular direction, right?
Yeah, that can happen. I'm not saying that cannot happen. It just says that it takes values outside any bounded set. I'm not saying it takes all the values outside a bounded set. It is taking values outside any bounded set is all I'm saying. So it may go up to infinity in one particular direction, as you said. But then also it's going to be it's taking values outside any bounded set.
Sir, but at that time the limit will not be infinity, right? Because in different directions it's different.
Yeah, but still it is no. This is a symbol. Limit fz as z tends to z0 is infinity. Infinity is really a symbol. So we have to assign meaning to it. And the meaning that one assigns is that it takes values outside any bounded set. This is the meaning that one assigns.
Okay.
Okay. So this is what one means by a pole. So in this case, the function gz equal to 1 upon fz. This is holomorphic at z0 with g of 0 equal to 0. Right. So it's clear that at least first of all, it's intuitively clear that if fz is going to infinity as z tends to z0, then 1 upon fz should go to 0. And so why is it holomorphic at 0? Why is g holomorphic at 0? Yeah, that's because of Riemann's theorem, right? What was Riemann said, it will be gz first of all has an isolated singularity at 0. But then when will gz become holomorphic at z0? At 0, sorry. Not 0, sorry. The 0 should be a z0. Yeah, g of z0 equal to 0, not g of 0 equal to 0. Sorry. So a little bit of a typo there again. So with g of z0 equal to 0. So yeah, by Riemann's theorem, if limit of 1 upon fz as z tends to z0, this limit exists, then gz will be holomorphic. But the limit does exist because it will be 1 upon, it's like 1 upon infinity form, so it will be 0. Limit of 1 by fz as z tends to z0 will be 0. So by Riemann's theorem, so we are using Riemann removable singularity theorem to conclude that G is holomorphic at Z0. Okay, since Gz is not identically equal to 0, that's also obvious. It follows that there exists a positive integer m such that Gz is equal to Z minus Z0 to the power M times Hz. So Gz is now holomorphic. Holomorphic implies analytic. So I can expand Gz as a power series. I take the high, but it also vanishes at Z0. So I look at the highest power of Z minus Z0 that can come out. So I can write Gz as Z minus Z0 to the power M times Hz for some holomorphic function H defined in a neighborhood of Z0 with H of Z0 not equal to 0. So I have taken the highest power of Z minus Z0 outside. The maximum power of Z minus Z0 that I can take outside, I have done that, and I have written it as Z minus Z0 to the power M times Hz.
So
So
why
now
maximum power?
Yeah.
Like, we are having
Sorry?
infinite series, right?
Huh?
So we are having an infinite power series.
No, but there is a lowest term now. There is the common the highest power of Z minus Z0 that I can take outside is some finite term, right? Power series may be infinite.
So we are taking out the maximum factor, like.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
Okay.
So H of Z0 is not equal to 0 because otherwise I would have taken a bigger factor out. So H of Z0 is not equal to 0. So note that such an M and therefore such a Hz is uniquely defined. And thus Fz, so this was Gz, now Fz was 1 upon Gz. So hence Fz is equal to Z minus Z0 to the power minus M times F1z for some holomorphic function F1z in a punctured neighborhood of Z0. H of Z0 was not equal to 0. So 1 upon H is equal to F1 is defined at Z equal to 0. So I can write Fz as Z minus Z0 to the power minus M times F1z for some holomorphic function F1z in a punctured neighborhood of Z0. M is called the order of the pole and is a measure of how fast the function blows up at 0. If M is 1, we call the pole a simple pole. So I've got an expression for Gz. Using that, I get an expression for Fz as Z minus Z0 to the minus M times F1z, where F1 is some holomorphic function defined in a punctured neighborhood of Z0. And M is what I'm calling the order of the pole.
Sir?
Yeah.
So a pole has to be an isolated singularity, right?
Yeah. I only defined for isolated singularities.
So
yes.
For example, if we have something like sine of 1 by Z, we
No,
cannot say that it has a pole at 0.
No, we don't say it is.
M is unique here.
Yeah, M is unique. M is unique because H is unique. I'm sorry, not M. Sorry, H is unique because M is unique. M is unique because I can just take the highest 0 outside. Yeah, the power series may begin with Z minus Z0 to the power M. So I can take that outside. Yeah, any doubts?